Like make your smile a little bit. Yeah, I heard. Yeah, I agree. I think too. Okay. Maybe we can solve it.
All right, folks, get ready to see the worst PowerPoint slide you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
That's middle school. Kelly, if you can read the bottom, go ahead and read the bottom to us.
Warning, side effects may include dizziness, nausea, and angry and confused audience. Been warned.
Yes. I've been teaching public speaking for a long time. I like teaching visual aids and a lot of public speaking, actually, from examples of things that I've seen go horribly wrong so that you all can try to avoid some of them. Obviously, this is designed to be intentionally obnoxious, but I want you to have good luck with your visual aids. So we're going to actually take a second here. I trust your judgment on a lot of these things. You've seen presentations with visual aids. You've seen things go well. You've seen things go not so well. So I want to see if we can generate a list together of what makes a good or bad visual aid. You just watched a horrible example of one. There's probably something you can start with that's negative. Yeah, go ahead.
Just too much going on, I guess.
Okay, too busy. You'd say that's bad.
Yeah.
Too much going on. Good. Somebody else. Kelly.
This is bad, right?
Either one.
The writing's not really clear.
Yep. So anything that's unclear. Okay. Somebody have anything good? Yeah. Ashley. Or Emily.
When there's not too many like words on the slide, like if they have just like ideas and concepts instead of like the full paragraph of what they want to say.
Yeah, so concise. Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah, Jacob.
A good visual aid is something that really helps back up what you're trying to say. A bad one just distracts from the point you're trying to get across.
Good. Should add something to the content. Okay. What else?
Kind of going along with that, just if you're talking about a certain, if you're describing something, having like the visual of that, then it kind of like helps you get rather than just describing something.
Yeah, I think I'd separate that out. So one is that it's relevant, it relates to what you're talking to. The other one is that it actually enhances what you're talking about. And I'm actually going to separate those out. Good. Okay. What else? What's something that's particularly entertaining with visual aids, or something that you've seen that goes terribly wrong when speakers are trying to use them?
I guess you could just say that it gets your attention, because I mean, when all the stuff was going on, that definitely got my attention.
Okay, so it might not have been the worst slide ever if it got you to pay attention, but you also want not all attention is good attention. Yeah. Okay, what else? Yeah.
Speaker needs to be familiar with the visual aid.
Yeah, good. Speaker needs to be able to be comfortable using it. What else? Have you seen anything that goes wrong with that? Probably even seen me not do visual aids entirely right. What are some of the things that I've done that have been odd in lecture? Got to be able to adapt, right? If this visual aid doesn't work properly, you have to be able to act as if it does, or you have to be able to figure out what you're going to do if the visual aid doesn't go right. Is there anything else we can think of? All right, this is a pretty good start, pretty good general list. I'm going to move on. Give me 1 second here. Yep, see. All right, so I have a couple keys that I've come up with just from my own time teaching public speaking. First is that they should always be prepared in advance. A lot of speakers, if they're working on their outlines, will put all their energy into what they're planning to say, and if you procrastinate and you try and write things the night before, a lot of speakers will have an outline done shortly before they give their speech, and they'll give maybe 5 or 10 minutes to their visual aids. It does not usually go very well. You have to prepare everything about your visual aid in advance. You should test it out. You should be ready to go. That's rule number 1. Even when you do, it's not necessarily always going to go perfect, but the more chances you have to practice with it, the more polished it is, the more professional you're going to look. Second thing is what a lot of you are getting at, and that is that your visual aids should always serve a purpose. They shouldn't just be tangential. They shouldn't just be there because somebody told you you needed a visual aid. So your first speech, I'm obviously making that part of the criteria, but they should be doing something to add to your content. They should be relevant. They should be enhancing whatever it is that you're talking about. The third thing is that size matters. I'm talking about your visual aids here. Get your heads out of the gutters. Yeah, that's right. You all watched that chili pepper video on Tuesday where the guy held up the little tiny habanero pepper that he had cut in half. And it wasn't particularly useful when he had a visual aid that nobody can see. I've also seen students do the opposite, where they have a visual aid that's so big and it's distracting, it actually upstages them. So be careful how much you have. Recognize that if you're using something like PowerPoint, you almost always have the option to resize things. And so you saw also that he had a map of South America that took up like a quarter of the screen when he could have just had the whole screen be that map of South America or even the areas that he was talking about. Color also matters. A lot of you might not think that you have to pay much attention to color schemes. We're going to see some examples of that going horribly wrong. Your audience doesn't want to go blind. Your audience doesn't want to be lost in what it is that they're talking about. If they are too distracted by your color scheme not matching, or maybe it's too bright or too dark, or there's too much or not enough contrast, it's going to be hard for them to process whatever it is you're talking about. Another thing that is kind of my rule, and it's one of those things that may be unique to me, but other instructors might differ on it, is I like to see a little bit of balance between text and images. So some of you talked about having things be really cluttered and really distracting. I don't want you to have a ton of information on there. You certainly shouldn't use this as your outline or especially as a preparation outline. You don't want to have full text up here a lot of the time. One of my instructors a few years ago said that it was probably like a 6x6 or 7x7 rule that they had for how much text you have if you're including blocks of text. That is no more than 6 or 7 rows and no more than 6 or 7 words per row. That even might be a little bit too much for your audience to process. A lot of people will put whole paragraphs up here. They'll put a lot of full sentences up here. You've seen me. I like to keep mine pretty concise. But the thing that I like and the thing that might distract some other instructors, but I like to see roughly a 50-50 balance of text and images. So you'll see that when I design slides, a lot of my slides will have text on the left side and an image on the right side or vice versa. It's just another way to make the presentation stand out a little bit better and make it a little more engaging for your audience. Another trick that I learned from a friend of mine is to do what's called the 45-degree rule. You all have taken geometry at some point. You know what angles look like. A lot of speakers, when they're presenting with visual aids, will either do a 90-degree rule, where they will look, straight ahead or off to the right, and will not look either at their audience or their visual aids. A lot of people will just look straight ahead and totally ignore what's going on up here, and they'll just gesture like this. A lot of speakers also will do the opposite and will talk to their visual aids and stand with their backside to you, and nobody wants to see that. So what my friend came up with is the 45-degree rule, which is you look kind of where Jacob is sitting right now. You look off in that direction, and that makes you free to talk to your audience. You can adjust your body, but I can kind of look at Jacob, look as if I'm presenting to all of you, and then when I need to, I can turn my hand this way. So that's a strategy that I'd highly recommend for you to use, is not to stand totally straight ahead or off to the side, but really kind of at an angle. The last thing that you need to do is really to be able to practice and prepare for anything that can go wrong. Has anybody heard of Murphy's Law before? What's Murphy's Law, Ashley?
It's if one thing goes wrong, then all the other things go wrong.
That's one way of putting it. Jonathan, you had your hand up. Did you want to try a different
Something
definition?
can go wrong, it will.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. That is true for a lot of things in public speaking. More than anything, it is true of visual aids. You've seen all of my struggles with Turning Point this semester. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So you need to be able to practice your speech as if you're going to deliver it with your visual aids going perfectly, with your visual aids not working at all, or some combination of the two. The more practice you have, the better for that. So just a couple of key pieces for your actual speeches then. You're not going to be speaking for that long. Your longest project in this class is about an 18 to 20-minute deliberation that you're going to be doing in small groups. You don't want to have a ton of slides to overwhelm your audience. You want to have probably somewhere between 2 and 8 slides, not including a title slide. I'd say 2 is even a little short for a 5-minute speech. People are going to wonder why you bother with visual aids at all. But that's kind of the ballpark range. If you go over or under that, I'm not going to be too concerned. But it's kind of the heuristic that I usually use is roughly 1 visual aid per minute if you're giving a short speech, and if you're giving a longer speech, you'll stay on your slides probably a little bit longer, not have so many there. Second thing is you always want to make sure they're adding something to your presentation. They're not just there for random distractions. We all love all the little flying things that PowerPoint can do. I try not to use a lot of those animations. I find them really distracting. Any visuals that you have, I mean, obviously it's fun to use jokes here and there, but be careful not to overdo things and try and make things as relevant and direct as you possibly can. The third thing is you want to make sure that it's visible. So the first thing up here you probably all can read says font. A lot of you will have fonts that look good on your personal computer screen that will not look so good when you show them on a bigger screen. The second thing that you probably can't read there is in yellow. It says color schemes. Color schemes are sometimes tricky. A lot of times, again, what looks good on your personal laptop or tablet or smartphone doesn't always look so good when it's blown up. So you want to make sure that you can read whatever it is that you're talking about. You want to make sure that nothing's too distracting in there. A lot of students have asked me, is it okay if I play a short video? And I say, well, it depends on what you're doing and how short and what it's up to. So you don't want your videos to be too long. I'd say in a 5-minute speech, anything over about 30 seconds is probably already pushing it. The main point for you to be speaking is for you to be speaking, not for somebody else to be speaking for you. So you don't want to have anything that's too distracting. Closely related to that is that your visual aids shouldn't upstage you. Anybody in theater, anybody know what that means? Upstage and downstage? Yeah, go ahead.
Upstage is like physically on the stage?
Yeah, yep.
Upstage is like you're closer to the end of the stage, downstage is you're further towards the back.
For the audience, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
Sorry.
That's all right. So upstage and downstage. It used to be the case in theater that stages were slanted a little bit toward the audience. So upstage literally meant that you were walking up this incline moving toward the back. Downstage meant that you were walking toward the audience. Your visual aids can upstage you physically. And I can stand a little bit in front of them. They can be behind me a little bit. You don't want them too far upstage of you. You don't want them too far behind you. But more than that, you don't want them to upstage you metaphorically. They shouldn't be more entertaining than you are. You want to put a lot of good energy into your visual aids, but you don't want them to be so distracting that your audience loses track of what it is that you have to say. So make sure that your visual aids are useful and productive and entertaining, but not more entertaining than you are. You're ultimately the speaker. It's your time to shine. You want to know your slides really well. I strongly recommend that you print out thumbnails. If any of you have used PowerPoint, you can actually print out PowerPoint slides. You can even do that 6 or 4 or 9 to a page. I strongly recommend that you do that. You could have that here with you. You're still going to be presenting from your speaking outline, but you could have that up on the table in front of you, and that way you know where you are and where you're going. It's another reminder of when to change your slides. You want to know them really well. It's really common for a lot of students to forget to change a slide here or there, and they're talking about something that's not up on the screen, and they think it's up on the screen behind them. They finish talking about it, realize it's not up there, and then they scramble through it and try to fix it. So you want to know your slides really well. The other thing that I recommend doing is including delivery cues to yourself in your speaking outline. These are just little reminders for yourself of make sure you cite things, make sure that you change your slides when you want to change them. Anything that you can put in there to help enhance the content will be useful for you. You want to make sure that you cite anything that you use. So just like when you are citing images, or when you're citing text in the text of your speech, any image that you use, you'll want to cite as well. The more detail you can give, the better. In most cases, usually just a little image at the bottom, a little caption at the bottom. What I usually recommend for visual aids is just borrowed from or courtesy of and a little caption, and then where the source is. You don't necessarily have to give a full bibliography reference, but you should show where your work is coming from. Last but not least, you want to make sure that you test out your visual aids, if you can, in the actual room where you're going to be speaking. It's very common for technology to work in one place and you move it to another computer and it doesn't work, or you try it and it looks a little bit different in the room that you're actually using. So you want to make sure that you try it out wherever it is that you're going to be using it. So I've given you some basic guidelines from my standpoint. I'm curious, I told you all on Tuesday to come with questions about visual aids. What questions do you have that I haven't yet answered? Can't imagine that I'm crystal clear about everything. There we go.
Is it alright if it's, well, my question is a little more specific to what
That's
I want to do.
That's what I want.
I'd like to talk about hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen to the brain.
Okay.
Which happens a lot in aircraft decompression. So I was thinking about getting one of those little Dixie Cup like passenger mask that drops down from the overhead compartments, and just like comparing that with what the aircrew masks look like and why it's so different, why it's so much more crucial that aircrew masks really give you a good seal.
Okay, so is there a question there?
Well, I was wondering if it's alright if
you use that
I have like one of those little Dixie Cup masks, and if that would be adequate as a
I think it would. The whole point here is to get you practicing with any kind of visual aid. PowerPoint is obviously not the only visual aid that exists out there. PowerPoint didn't even exist until about 25 years ago. I'd encourage you to think outside the box, but the point is so that you get comfortable presenting information and presenting information with some kind of physical presence that enhances it. So a visual aid like that could be useful. You could also pair that with something like PowerPoint. Whatever you use, whether it's an image or a PowerPoint slide or an object or a model or charts and graphs, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you follow all the rules that we've talked about, and you still want to practice with it very carefully. Other questions? Katie.
So how exactly does this work? Like, do I save it on my computer and I plug my computer in? Or?
If you're going to use the lab here to work, you can actually use either of the PCs that are on here. I'm going to be here to help you out. The laptops, sorry, the PCUs, they're hard desktops, are mounted to the back of these televisions. So you can use these televisions. You can just bring in a flash drive, or you can save your stuff to Google Drive or something like that and have it ready to go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Maria.
So if we're using like photos or something in our presentation, how do you want us to cite those within the presentation? Like, do you want a sources page? Do you want an APA style?
Yeah, so any images that you happen to use, if you're going to have your preparation outline with a full bibliography, I would include those images in there. If you can, cite them in whatever style you're using. Otherwise, you can just say image courtesy of and then give a URL or wherever you happen to get it from. I'm not going to be too picky about citation styles. The more important thing here is that you're trying to show where your information is coming from, so that if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to go see it for themselves, they can follow up on it later. Yeah.
Do we cite our sources out loud in our speech?
Anything that you're including as information, you should cite out loud with that formula I gave you on Tuesday. Their author's name, their credentials, some version of says, and then the quotation or paraphrase of what they said. So that you should cite. As you're citing images, I don't think that you need to. That's part of why I like captions for images, is so you don't have to cite them out loud, but your audience can still see where that information comes from. So it doesn't interrupt the flow of the presentation. You still have that information. Yeah.
Like in addition to like if I'm gonna have like a visual aid, like a picture, and if I want to bring like the physical like object or whatever, can I pass that around to like people that I'm presenting to? Or
That's a good question, yeah. I think you can. Just be mindful of objects' ability to distract people. A lot of people will give out handouts of something, especially if there's like a complicated procedure or more information. People will hand those out to their audience in advance, and then what does the audience do when they get that information? They read that and they don't listen to a word that you're saying. They could read that later. And so what I recommend doing is actually doing that near the end of your presentation. That way it's less distracting. If it's an object that people can see and it's not too distracting, they're only holding it for a handful of seconds, it doesn't really matter. But anything that they have to read, I'd recommend doing after. Right. All right. Well, in that case, we're going to move on to your favorite thing in the world. We're going to do some impromptu speeches. Why am I doing impromptu speeches today?
Yeah, why?
Visually. What I'm having you do is I'm going to give you a couple scenarios, and these are things that have actually happened to people that I've seen while presenting. Some of them have happened to me personally, others of them have happened to my students or other contexts. All you're going to do in these impromptu speeches is you're going to read what happened. You're going to say how you might have prevented it if you had been able to prevent it in rehearsal. You're going to say how your audience might react if it happened to you. What do you think they would do and how do you think they'd handle it? And then third, what would you do differently? Or what would you do in the moment if it did happen to you? How would you recover from it? One of the most difficult things about public speaking is being able to recover when things don't go as planned. And so I want to give you a chance to test that out. And the only way to really do that is to do it impromptu, because when things go wrong, you don't plan for them. So I'm going to tease Ranju in particular. She's going to do the first one.
What?
You were the loudest one complaining about impromptu speeches, so you get to go first.
Okay. Does she have to stand up in front?
All right. So Ranju, you try to load your speech on the classroom computer. You receive an error message telling you that the file will not open.
I could have saved on my Google Docs or have a flash drive for my first question.
Okay.
Well, they'll just chill while I figure it out. How would you do it? Like I said, I would like saving like multiple sources, like
Okay.
flash drive, Google Docs, and on my computer. So if one doesn't work, then I can use the other one.
Highly recommend that. Yeah, good. How do you think your audience would react if this happened? If it, let's say you saved it in all those places and it didn't actually work.
How would you guys react?
That's fine to ask. What do you think?
What do you guys think, huh? Chill.
You're pretty
Chill.
embarrassed.
Yeah, they'll just like say.
Like sad.
Yeah, they'll make that one over.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating. And the more visual, the more vivid your images are, the more distracting it is to their audience when it's not there. And you have to sit there and basically describe it. Okay, here's where I would have had this picture of this. I'll picture this. It doesn't work all that well. Just having the image ready to go is good. So I highly recommend saving things in multiple places. Let's give Ranju a round of applause. It is very common for this to be a Mac PC thing. So I will warn you of that now. Almost any of you could have this happen to you because this computer happens to be a PC. This computer happens to be a Mac. So even if you're saving from a Mac to a Mac or a PC to a PC, this could still happen to you if they're different versions or if the software just doesn't want to work. For some reason, I've come in here every day for the last week and the internet's been down. I don't know why the internet's down, but I had to go run and grab a flash drive from my office because I couldn't have my presentation otherwise. So there's lots of things that you could do differently, lots of things that can go wrong. And I picked on Ranju, but I'm going to let Ranju be mean and pick on someone else. So you get to have a little fun now and say who's going to go next. All right, Lily. Lily, you're in the middle of the speech, and the short video that you have for your audience is too quiet to hear. So how might you have prevented that in preparation?
Like volume's not loud enough for them to hear.
Yeah, so you play the video, and you realize nobody can hear it, and you don't know what's going on.
Well, if it's a short video, I'd probably just replay it.
Okay, yeah, so you can always pause it in the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, is there something that you could have done beforehand, before you even got up to speak, that could have prevented this from happening?
Or you can practice in here before to see like what volume you needed on.
Yeah, so you could come in here either the day before or like 15 minutes before and just test out the sound. Maybe it's going to go wrong, and that's okay, but you at least know what's going on then. Okay. How do you think your audience would react?
It'd be kind of awkward. Like, they'd probably just sit there and watch.
Yeah, we've all seen this happen where someone gets up and gives a video and it's not working, and they're like, okay, well now what do I do? One thing that they do is just sit there and kind of wait for you, and that's what a good audience will do. What will a bad audience do? Somebody else? Yeah, go ahead. They'll start booing you. They'll
Just say that they can't hear it.
They'll say out loud they can't hear it. They'll start talking to each other and murmuring to each other.
Yeah.
Anytime anything goes wrong in lecture, I hear 300 of you and you think you're all being quiet. That's all I hear. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Sometimes they might get up and leave. It's not a short video. If they know that the video is the bulk of your presentation and it's not working, a bad audience might get up and leave. Yeah. So Lily, what would you do to try and fix the problem if you were on the spot and this happened to you?
I tried turning up the volume.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, usually the volume is in more than one place. In here, the volume is actually coming out of the television set, so you have to use the remote. So some of you, for your first instinct, might be to go to the volume settings on your computer. That might help a little bit, but the volume, if you don't know that the volume is actually coming out of the TV and not out of another external speaker, that's not going to help you all that much. Okay? Good. Lily, you can pick who's going to go next. Lance, you're up.
Oh, white painting.
All right, Lance, you have PowerPoint slides for your introduction, conclusion, and each of your 3 main points. You're starting your conclusion, you realize that your slideshow is still on main point number 2. So how might you have prevented that?
How might, well, I could have included something to remind me to change the slide.
Okay, so yeah, those delivery cues can be really helpful if you write them into your note cards. I just put CS and let's say red, and then I see that little CS, I know what that means. I change my slides. Okay.
And I would hope that they would politely cough or gesture, you know, just be like, hey, forgetting something, you know.
I have seen that happen. Usually they don't cough, but usually they'll gesture and say, pay attention to your slides. Okay. Are there other ways they might respond?
Other ways that they might respond?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they might be a little rude. Or
Okay.
they might start laughing very audibly.
Yep, they could. All right, so what would you do if you found this happened to you?
I would promptly apologize
Okay.
and continue on as though nothing had happened. Oh, and of course change to my conclusion slide.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, so this one is really common. A lot of times it has to do with students not rehearsing quite enough. Sometimes it is other things, like if you accidentally set the settings on PowerPoint to automatically advance your slides, it'll do that and it can mess with it. I've seen this one happen. A lot of speakers will have not just 3 main points, but will have 4 or 5 main points, and they'll be 2 or 3 behind because they forgot to change their slides. One of the worst things that they do when they get to that moment is they're like, oh, here, 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 here. Okay, now we're on my conclusion. They talk for like 2 seconds about each slide. If you're going to do that, I would recommend just kind of not even acknowledging that you screwed up, but just actually just going to where you're supposed to be. It's on you that it didn't quite work out the way that you had planned. You'll see that most of these are not a science, but are more of an art, and you get to decide what you're going to do, but ultimately, by this point, you've realized you've screwed something up, and you have to handle it in some capacity, so you might as well do your best with it. All right, let's give Lance a round of applause. You did really well beforehand, but your next one for ready. Lance, go ahead and pick on someone else.
That gentleman right there.
Okay.
Richard, come up
That's
here.
really dark.
Yep.
Okay.
I want to see what this looks like.
I barely can read my song glasses.
Yes, it is. So read the prompt out to us.
You are in the middle of your speech and you realize that the color scheme on your slides is hard to read.
Okay.
Okay.
So what would you have done different? Or sorry, yeah, how could you have prevented this?
Well, I don't know. I bet I'd say myself, so I probably couldn't even read it, typing it out. So I probably would.
apologize for
Well, I
making
probably wouldn't have this one.
Yeah.
This color, I different choose. And if you're gonna do black, I'd probably choose a lighter color at least, because contrasting. I'm like what you did with the cream color and the white. It's kind of hard to see, so you have to pick contrasting colors. Or and it's also a lot of words too, so you could reduce the amount of words on
That's
the
true.
other side as well.
Okay. Anything else you could have done beforehand?
I think just ultimately changing colors, reduce the amount.
Fair enough.
That's
I would say again, if you can test it out in the room, you don't always have that option. Sometimes you are, let's say you're in a job interview and you're giving a PowerPoint presentation. Most of the time, they're not going to give you a whole lot of time beforehand to present. They just expect you to be able to do it. Okay. How might your audience react?
well, like me, I mean, people with glasses like that stuff, we're gonna have a hard time seeing that for sure. And they probably would just ignore the slide overall and just pay attention to what I was saying.
Yeah.
I
If
guess
they can't pay attention to what you have up here, they're going to start listening to you.
Yeah,
That's
so-
one thing.
So visually, just be void in that.
Sometimes people will sit there and squint,
Yeah,
and that
too.
can be really distracting if you see a bunch of people doing this too.
Yeah. And then, or that could be distracting as well. So
Okay.
that would lose focus on me too.
What might you do if it happened? What would you do in the moment if you get up and your slideshow looks like this?
I'd probably read it out loud
Okay.
because I definitely could tell that people are gonna have problems reading that, so I'd read it for them what it says
Fair
and
enough.
continue speaking from there.
Sounds good. Let's give Richard a round of applause. This one happened to me my first day of teaching ever. I walked into my room at Texas A&M. The screen was bigger than this, but it was off an overhead projector screen, so it was dimmer than this. And you couldn't even read the words standing this close to it. So what I had to do in the moment was stop, go through my whole PowerPoint, change the whole background to white instead of black, and then you could read the red text. it looked beautiful on my personal computer screen, and the first day of teaching, I panicked because it was red text on a black background. I should have known better because my father was red-green colorblind, and so he would have had a very hard time reading this. Lots of students will have a hard time reading your text if it's too similar in terms of the color scheme. I have another friend who happens to be dyslexic, and she says that light text on a dark background is much harder to read than dark text on a light background. So I'd encourage you to keep your color schemes closer to white or a lighter color, and then not to have really heavy dark backgrounds, but to actually have dark text, and it stands out. It's a little bit more contrast that way. All right, Richard, go ahead and pick on someone else.
All right, Maria can go next.
All right, Maria. You're in the middle of a demonstration speech, and out of nervousness, you drop your visual aid. It falls onto the floor and breaks. Taylor, this could happen to you. Go ahead.
Well, you can't really prevent that. I mean, you could practice holding it, I guess. It kind of depends on what your visual aid is. I guess you would, you can't really prevent that at all. Your audience would probably laugh or just sit there awkwardly. And if I did that, I would probably just pick it up, and unless it like shattered, is it the ceramic object?
We'll talk in a minute.
Okay, well, if it was a ceramic object, I would just say I'll clean it up. I get. Well, I don't know. If it's not, you can just pick it up and keep going. Say sorry, and keep going.
So obviously this one happened to someone else I know. This happened to one of my students a few years ago. They were doing a speech, and they were talking, it was a policy speech, and they were trying to make some kind of analogy about how much money they had to have in order to fund their proposal. And they had a cup on the edge of a table, and they were pouring water into the cup to try and show that there wasn't enough room in the cup, and then the cup would overflow. Well, they started pouring water into the cup started overflowing, it moved, it fell onto the floor and shattered. So I had water and glass on the floor where my students were presenting in the middle of a student's speech. So this student was smart about it and just backed away from it, made sure she didn't get into that mess, and then went back in and cleaned it up later so that it wasn't a hazard for anyone else. But it still kind of caught her a little bit off guard during her speech. She still had to finish her speech with this big mess all over the floor. And she handled it pretty well by just ignoring it. But you can see that even if you practice things well in rehearsal, things can go wrong and they will go wrong. So I want to try and help you think through these kinds of scenarios. Maria, go ahead and pick on someone else.
Oh, lovely.
All right. Go ahead, Madison.
You're asked to give a presentation as part of a job interview. The power in the building goes out in the middle of your presentation. Okay, but why would I continue presenting if all the lights are out? Because then I'm assuming the audience would be panicking.
It's a job interview.
I feel like they're not going to care if we're sitting there in the dark.
This one also happened, but go ahead.
Well, I guess it would depend on what kind of presentation I was doing, because knowing me, I'd end up having brought a laptop as well. And if it's a job interview, there's not many people unless it's a high-up position, so I'd give them my computer.
You just have them huddle around. It seems like a valid solution. Okay.
I feel like they'd react more to the fact that the power went out than the fact that my computer was not working, but
that certainly could be the case. Yeah, especially if there's some kind of reason to panic, like you said. People might actually leave in the middle of your speech, or if they're really invested in you and they don't see a threat that's urgent, they'll probably just sit there and wait and see what you do, because they're going to evaluate how well you are on the spot. Okay. What might you do? Well, you already kind of answered that. All right. So this one actually happened. I had a colleague who was interviewing for a job, and we were watching the colleague present, and power went out in the middle of his presentation. He was a communication scientist, so he had a whole bunch of statistics and models and charts up in here, and it was all very complicated and very sophisticated, and he was able to explain it very well. The audience didn't see any kind of threat of urgency and saw it as a good opportunity to evaluate him as a candidate and how well he handled impromptu speeches and things going wrong. He actually just kept going with his presentation as if the power were still on, did very well. People spoke very highly of his ability to adapt to that. I had colleagues who were in their 60s and 70s who'd been teaching for 30, 40 years who said, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. He handled it really well. So Murphy's Law applies to visual aids. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But I also told you before that audiences tend to be pretty forgiving. Most audiences want you to do well. Most audiences, when something does go wrong, are able to put themselves in your position and try to think, oh gosh, I don't know what I would do in that scenario. So, maybe I'll be a little bit understanding that this one didn't go quite as planned. So that actually worked out in this person's case fairly well, that he was able to just go on as if it wasn't a problem. But everyone else in the room was kind of freaked out, like, oh my gosh, that was really scary. I don't know what I would do if I were giving an interview for that. So, good. Go ahead and pick one more person. Kaden.
You have a graphic image that is on the border of inappropriate. You think it's fine, but when you show it, your audience looks disgusted and offended. I could have probably showed it to like my roommate or to like people and saw what they thought of it.
Yeah, so testing out your visual aid. If you're not sure about it, ask around. Good.
The audience would probably make like noises and start talking to each other and lose focus altogether. If it happened to me, I would probably apologize and just go to the next slide if it bothered people.
That seems reasonable. Yeah. This one didn't quite happen. I was grateful that a student came to me first and asked me how this would be. She was giving an informative speech with a visual aid and wanted to talk about surgery that she had recently had. Well, why did she have this surgery? She was in a terrible, terrible car accident, like horrifying car accident where she split open her head and wanted to show pictures of the back of her head where it had split open. And I was like, I think that's going to be a bit too much for some people in your audience, and I told her to ask around, and everyone in the audience is like, yeah, don't do that. There are other ways to talk about your topic. You can still talk about the surgery that you had, and you can talk about how it worked. You can talk about the tools that they used. You can show pictures of the doctors. You can show pictures of maybe your car even. Don't show us pictures of blood and gore. Some people, actually, there are situations that totally call for that. You know that my research tends to deal with violence and pretty graphic violence. So sometimes I actually do need to use violent video or violent images for the shock value that it produces. You have to be able to find that balance. You have to be able to do audience analysis with every single aspect of your visual aid. So you want to be prepared. You want to think through, okay, this could work out as planned, or it could go horribly wrong. I think being able to adapt to it if it goes horribly wrong is a key takeaway here. I don't want to scare you out of using visual aids entirely, because just because anything that can go wrong will go wrong doesn't mean that it goes wrong all of the time. Most speakers have gotten pretty good at preparing things in advance and trying to figure out how am I going to minimize the things that can go wrong so that they don't go wrong. Okay, so now what I have for you in ways that are horribly visual, I have for you a video that I love that just happens to get at all of the things that we haven't discussed yet that you want to be careful with in PowerPoint presentations especially. This is a comedian, I think he used to work in business, named Don McMillan. He has a video of all the things that he has hated about PowerPoint, and I want you to take notes on these because there are a lot of things that a lot of speakers do. I even heard of someone applying for a very high job at the university recently and having issues with PowerPoint, so be careful with that.
There's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. There's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common, many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points. too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data into their presentations. They just shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects, and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, "It's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about?" Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing.
Don't do it. So, you've seen it. I'm sure you've all seen presentations that have not done so well with PowerPoint. So I want you to try and avoid, if you can, some of those issues. I recommend PowerPoint. I like PowerPoint. A lot of you will have to use PowerPoint for something. It is not perfect software. It can suck up your entire life trying to make it look pretty. Don't spend hours and hours and hours trying to make it look pretty. Yeah, so those are kind of the main things. Visual aids are pretty intuitive. The main message I want you to take away from today is be prepared to give your speech with the visual aids working, not working, or partially working. Know how you will adapt in the moment. I gave you impromptu speeches. A couple of you were not really sure what you do in the moment. That's okay in rehearsal like this. It's less okay when you're on the spot if you freeze up and you don't know what to do. So you have to try and figure out, okay, as I'm planning ahead, what are things that could go wrong with my visual aid, and what might I do to prevent anything becoming problematic? We've got a few more minutes here. I want to see if you have any other questions about visual aids in particular, or about your speech, or something else.
Already jump in. So would you suggest with our visual aids making them not essential to our speech, where they can help give visuals of our speech, but not be essential? Well, this data shows this. We can still in our speech be able to describe that. So.
Yeah, when possible, I would say just because the possibility of it not working out. If you have visual aids that are supporting the content of what you're talking about, but won't be make or break kinds of things. What gets challenging is if you're presenting your own research, or if you're presenting something that's really technical or really vivid, then you don't necessarily have the option. The visual aid really is the message, and you have to be able to use it as a message. And so, you have to be prepared for it not to work, but you also can prepare by trying to explain what was in the chart. In a room like this, if you really got stuck, you could actually use these whiteboards here. That's another option that none of you considered, but it's a possibility. If you might have some stick figures and some real terrible drawings, but they might be better than nothing. Using the resources in the room could be helpful. Yeah. Other questions about visual aids specifically, or about your speeches that are coming up? Y'all feel pretty ready for next week? Yeah, right.
So you want a word for word outline, and then you want a separate outline instead of speaking outline?
Yep.
Two.
Yes. Does anybody want to explain what those do? Why you have both of them? One goes to me, yeah. One is for me. It's really more for you to start with. So you want to do the word-for-word outline first. That's your preparation outline. That is the perfect version of your speech if you were to read it from a manuscript, so that you don't have to ad-lib everything, because you all hate impromptu speeches, and if you say, I'm going to ad-lib this story, or I'm going to ad-lib this transition, you're not going to, or it's not going to go the way that you planned on it. If you say, tell this story here, and your story becomes 2.5 minutes of your 5-minute speech, and then you get lost and you have to shuffle around everything else, then you can't really do that on the fly. If you're able to have practiced it in advance, you can practice with it with a timer, you can practice it in front of a mirror, get really comfortable with the word-for-word text, then translate that into your keyword speaking outline. The keyword speaking outline is what you're actually going to deliver from, and that is on speech day, so that you are not trapped to a manuscript, reading to your chin, talking in a monotone voice, not looking at your audience, and not gesturing, reading everything from your outline. So you turn in the preparation outline to show that you've done it and to walk through the process, but you're supposed to take that preparation outline and get down to keywords so that you can deliver your speech pretty confidently and pretty comfortably from keywords. Other questions? Thought I saw some other hands. Yeah.
The max time is 6 minutes. No more.
Max time is 6 minutes. So you'll upload your speeches into GoReact. GoReact will show me how long your speeches are. I'll tell you that at 6 minutes, I'm going to stop grading. So whatever you haven't delivered by 6 minutes doesn't count toward your speech. So if you don't have your conclusion, your speech doesn't have a conclusion. It goes back to that whole time limits thing that I talked about, where if I'm lecturing for 50 minutes and I have you all come in for 10, you wonder why I'm here at all. And if I have you come in for 50 minutes and 1 second, you're all packing up and throwing daggers at me. So I want you to get comfortable working within time limits. Practice your speech for 5 minutes, and then if it goes a little under or a little over, you have a minute window on either side. That's 20%, where you can be a little flexible. Other thoughts? Questions? Yeah.
So I'm doing a PowerPoint, and would you say it's like good or bad to just have like straight up? I know like when we do our presentation, you don't want to say, "Hi, I'm Jacob, and I'm going to talk to you." Can I have like a title page that basically says,
yes,
civil engineering, bigger than me?
Yes. Actually, exactly what you just said. I don't want you to get up there and say, hi, my name is Jacob, and today I'm going to be talking to you about X, because all 17 of you will do it, and it's not a very good attention getter. Your attention getter should be the first thing your audience hears. It's the first thing your audience is going to judge you by. We all are learning or already know each other's names in here. You don't need to tell your audience that. So you can have a title slide. I think that's a good idea, just in case you forget. Have your title, have your name, have anything else that you think is relevant, an image, or some cool stuff on there. Yeah. Do you have something? Okay. Anybody else have questions, thoughts? All right, cool. I will see you all next week then. Good luck with your speeches. Let me know if you need anything from me. I'm happy to help you. Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, one of us can report. Yeah. Okay. I think that's